What does it mean to have a purposeful narrative? That's a question that I always ask myself after watching a movie or show, especially in an era where most projects are driven by some form of corporate agenda rather than a pure passion for storytelling as a medium of entertainment. Now, the answer to that question in its simplest definition is a story that is able to stay true to why it was created in the first place and maintains its meaning, aka its purpose, throughout the adventure that it takes its intended audience. That's where Spider Man Across the Spider Verse comes in. Since its release on July 2nd, I've watched this movie a solid 3 times, and I definitely plan on watching it again to relive the mesmerizing experience while it's still playing in theaters. Something I've grown to understand after every viewing, though, is that this movie is a beautiful representation of how to properly answer the question of what it means to have a purposeful narrative in its current day and age. To put it bluntly, the purpose of this movie is to provide a purpose to its characters, or at least bring up the question of not what, but why their purpose is the way it is. I know, it's a mouthful. Spoiler warning to those who haven't had the chance to watch the movie yet, to whom I highly recommend watching it as soon as possible. Alright, with that out of the way, let me explain. Starting off with one of our two main protagonists, Miles Morales, it should come as no surprise that his character is the most complex out of anyone in the movie, followed closely only by Gwen Stacy, whom we will talk about later. By the end of the first movie, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, it's evident that Miles has finally found his purpose in life as a new Spider-Man of his universe, but that's where we're sorely mistaken. See, we were led to believe that that was his newfound purpose, when in reality it couldn't have been further from the truth. In the sequel, 16 months have passed since his debut as Spider-Man, and we're introduced to a more grounded Miles who thinks he knows what he's doing when he clearly doesn't. Even before he dives into the multiverse, he's seen constantly struggling to balance his new duty as a superhero and his relationship with his parents. No matter how hard he tries to do both, he can't, and that's the dilemma that Miles refuses to accept is impossible to change. This is reflective of how he reacts later in the movie when being told he can't save his father and maintain the multiverse at the same time. It's simply impossible, or at least according to Miguel O'Hara. Whether or not Miguel is telling the truth about canon events, Miles' immediate response is to run away from the problem, which is what he does with his parents as well. His inability to accept why his purpose as a spider person is the conflict of the story, the true purposeful narrative of the movie. I absolutely adore the multiversal spin they took on the idea of a Spider-Man's purpose, with the notion that every spider person has to succumb to traumatic events in their personal life in order to fulfill their reason for existing at all. With the multiverse being the topic of almost every superhero story nowadays, it's refreshing to see it being utilized as a plot device rather than a cheap way to garner nostalgia among fans. Okay, let's take a step back and revisit a scene which I strongly believe encapsulates the very moment Miles realized he has the power to create his own purpose, not just as Spider Man, but as himself. In the beginning of the scene, Miles makes an attempt to tell his mother Rio that he is in fact a friendly neighbor of Spider Man. However, at this point in the story, he's still too scared to tell her his secret, possibly in fear of even more rejection from his parents, so he backs out. After a moment of hesitation, Rio realizes that maybe, just maybe, her and Jeff have been too hard on Miles. So what does she do? She tells Miles to go. See, the significance of this line stems from the reality that this is an experience that all parents will go through when raising a child, whether they like it or not. There will be a time when that child they've been raising for years will no longer need them, or at least need them to grow as a person. They need the tutelage of other people now, not them. So as a parent, it was a wake-up call for Rio to finally let Miles spread his wings, like he said to his father earlier in the movie. Let me just point out that I love this whole scene so much more because it parallels what Jeff told Miles in the previous movie when he breaks down his story explaining why he's so hard on him at times. Jeff was afraid of losing Miles the way he lost his brother Aaron, so he pushed Miles to become a greater person than either of them ever were without realizing the amount of pressure he was bestowing upon him. In the end, all Jeff wanted to do was to be a good father, which is reflective of his character in the sequel as well, where his struggle to be a parent continues, and the only thing he can really do is, to quote Miles, get off the kid's ass. In Rio's case, it's to put her full faith in Miles to protect that little boy she knows and loves in her stead, which she does in the most meaningful speech I've ever heard in a comic book movie, at least in a parenting perspective. She reassures Miles that he will be loved wherever he chooses to go and whatever he decides to do, which I cannot stress enough is the most important thing that a child needs to hear when growing up, because unconditional love is the key to earning a child's trust. Hell, it's the most important thing that anyone needs to hear at any age in any relationship, because the moment someone doubts if they're loved, that's when they're lost. At least until someone saves them. Taking the time to just talk to someone and let them know that they're appreciated is enough to change the course of a person's life, so it's an important life lesson to recognize the small things that inform a person that they're worth it. Getting back to Rio, just like her husband, she's also afraid of losing Miles emotionally, but they both realize in this movie that the purpose of a parent is to raise a child, not keep them hostage to prevent further growth. The theme of parenthood is made even more evident at the end of the movie when Miles G. Morales is introduced, giving us a glimpse of what a version of Miles without the parenting of his father would have turned out like. Speaking of parenthood, let's discuss the layered characterization of Gwen and her relationship with her father, George Stacy, among others. Being the other main protagonist of the story, Gwen's journey throughout the movie is turbulent to say the least, if not more turbulent than Miles's. Not necessarily more complex, but more hidden. To dig to the core of her character, we have to explore where she came from and the past that continues to haunt her to this day. In the first movie, it was briefly alluded to that Gwen has a fear of making new friends due to the death of her best friend, Peter Parker. Since the first movie was heavily focused on Miles above anyone else, Gwen's past wasn't explored any further, which I believe was for the best given that it was relevant to Miles' journey to become Spider-Man. However, as the sequel treats Gwen as a deuteragonist, meaning that she's the second most important character in the movie, it's critical to understand why her mindset is the way it is. Off the bat, we learn in the beginning scene that Gwen was directly responsible for the death of her Peter Parker, so she's been wearing a thick coat of guilt ever since. What's worse, her father believes that she did it intentionally, albeit without knowing her double life as Spider-Woman. Despite her best efforts, she can't convince her father that it could have been an accident, so not only did she lose her best friend, but her father's support in the process. Through this traumatic experience, she developed a fear of getting too close to people and fear of losing them like she did with Peter and her father George. I mean, who can really blame her? She just lost two, if not the only two people besides Aunt May, who genuinely cared about her. Being able to open up to anyone else after such an event is difficult, especially for someone who's already living a life of secrets. It ultimately comes down to a boiling point where she reveals her identity as Spider-Woman to her father, which he refuses to accept, therefore giving up his duty as her father in favor of his duty as an authority figure. You can visibly see the pain in her eyes as she realized the smallest flicker of hope that she had that her father would forgive her if he knew the truth had faded away. And what does she do next? She runs away, just like Miles. To quote her, she doesn't know how to fix this, so she takes the easiest way out and runs away to the Spider Society, which is a hidden allegory for escapism. As she finds out later in the movie, all the other Spider people are not the people she needed consolation from the most, but rather her father. Despite sharing a similar past, the number one thing she needed was a reassurance from a parental figure, her father, her dad. After being betrayed yet again by the hands of the people whom she convinced herself was her second family, she confronts her father and realizes what her purpose was the whole time. Her purpose was to overcome her fear of confrontation, which is a very, and I mean very real fear that exists inside a lot of people. The problem with confrontation is that a lot of those people see it as a problem. They see it as an unnecessary way to cause drama. The truth is, though, that confrontation isn't a bad thing. In fact, it's required in any human relationship to not only better understand what they're thinking, but for them to better understand you. No matter how hard you try, it's impossible for even your closest loved ones to guess how you're truly feeling. They can only infer off of hints, if any at all. That's the lesson that Gwen learned upon returning to her universe, that perhaps she was the one who pushed her father away, not him. And what do you know? The moment she realizes that, all the shackles come off and both of them share a heartwarming scene of healing. As I stated before, sometimes literally all it takes to solve what seems like an unsolvable problem is to just sit down and talk about it. Let your feelings loose and talk to them. If you want to blame them or get a point across, that's totally fine because that's how you feel. Not telling them what's wrong could not only make matters worse, but hurt them because they would be left wondering what they did wrong and never get an answer. Forgiveness comes from the heart, and if they truly loved you, which you know they did because of the time you spent together, then they will find a way to move on, but only if you tell them. Gwen acknowledged his essential life lesson and realized she had now done to Miles what she had done to her dad, keep him in the dark. So she set off on a journey to make amends and to find a new purpose as a better friend. Just as a side note, I know a lot of people are pointing out the beauty of the animation in this scene, but I want to take a quick moment to call attention to the parallel this scene has with an earlier scene with Gwen and her father. You'll notice that in the earlier scene, Gwen goes to her father for a hug, whereas in the later scene she pulls her father toward her for one instead. It's another allegory, but this time reflecting on how Gwen was finally able to bring her father back into her life at long last, the parental figure that she needed the most. Poetically, George was able to find his purpose as a father because of this. Before I move on to the next character, you may have noticed I haven't really brought up Miles and Gwen's dynamic in the movie, which is mostly because I feel like the conflict created between them will be resolved in the next movie, Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse. However, the one thing I'll say is I love the hypocrisy of Gwen's character as she knowingly pushes Miles away in fear of losing him, which is ironic to say the least given that now she's the one giving up her duty as a friend in favor of her duty as an authority figure of the Spider Society, mirroring her dad earlier in the movie. She comes to her senses though, as we all know, so let's just hope that these two get the conclusion that they deserve, or at least Miles deserves. On the other side of the spectrum, there's one character in particular who hasn't had the chance to fully realize his purpose yet. No, it's not Jessica Drew, Professor Parker, Margot Kess, Ben Reilly, or The Spot. I think all of them will find their true purpose in the next movie. In The Spot's case, they realize that he doesn't want to destroy the multiverse after all and be the bad guy. Obviously not Miles G. Morales, whom we're just introduced to at the end of the movie. It's not Peter B. Parker, who I believe has only semi-realized his purpose in life in the form of Mayday Parker, admitting that the only reason he had her was because of what Miles taught him in the first movie. However, as Peter still has an unresolved conflict with Miles after lying to him about not knowing his status as an anomaly, like Gwen, needs to make amends in order to fulfill his purpose as a surrogate parental figure for Miles. It's not even Hobie Brown, who is the only character who has fully realized his purpose even before his debut, which is to be an anti-authority figure against all odds. No, it's Miguel O'Hara. I say Miguel for last because I knew I was going to have fun talking about him. See, on the surface, Miguel is obviously an authority figure, being the founder of the Spider Society, so it's easy to assume that he knows what he's talking about, i.e. canon events or the web of life and destiny. Hell, he was deliberately drawn to be intimidating with a huge silhouette by the artist, meaning that this was what they were going for. It's clear that the other spider people recruited in Spider Society put their faith in him as a leader because of how much he already knows about the arachno-humanoid polymultiverse, aka the Spider-Verse. What they failed to recognize is that Miguel is the most insecure and unstable of them all, unfit to be a leader, but put on a pedestal in fear of confrontation just like Gwen. I refuse to believe that every single spider person who chased Miles is on Miguel's side, since the logic of allowing someone to die in favor of saving others defeats and negates the meaning of what it means to put on that mask. The mantle of a spider person, a spider totem as they call in the comics, is to save everyone they can no matter the outcome. While I can see some spider people relating to Miguel's cause like Insomniac Spider-Man or Spectacular Spider-Man, there's absolutely no way that Penny Parker, who was fighting alongside Miles in the first movie, would turn her back on him just because she was told that's how the story is meant to go. I mean, she joins Gwen on a rescue mission at the end of the movie, so that kinda confirms what I'm getting at. Anyways, Miguel is truly a broken person with nobody left, explaining why he is the way he is. As for his introduction to Gwen, he believes that his purpose is to lead an elite strike force dedicated to security of the multiverse, when it's so far from that. The problem is that Miguel has nobody to receive unconditional love from, unlike Miles with his parents. He doesn't even have anyone to confront his issues with, unlike Gwen with her father. No, all he has is the Spider Society and Lila, the virtual assistant that he created to comfort him or be on his side, since she was programmed to be that way from the start. Everything about Miguel's life is manufactured, so he can't see what's natural, which is ironic since he's trying to protect the laws of nature itself. In the scene where he kicks Gwen out of the Spider Society, she claims that they're supposed to be the good guys, to which Miguel responds in an angry voice, "We are," followed by a much more hesitant, "We are." Not only does his facial expression and body language signify a sense of a hurt ego, but the change in tone between the same line really goes to show how much Miguel needs a reassurance of the rest of the Spider Society behind him to keep him going. He doesn't want his status as a leader to be compromised, and it's demonstrated beautifully through Oscar Isaac's voice performance in this scene alone. That's how fragile the character of Miguel O'Hara really is. I believe that in the next movie, Miguel will inevitably give in to Miles' cause, or reveal the truth about what canon events really are. Regardless, I think I've talked enough about this movie for one video, so as a closing statement, let me again reiterate the importance of a proper parenthood in a child's life, as without it they will never fully unlock what their purpose in life is, or if they're really worth the trouble. Love to people who've got your back, because togetherness is the gift that you don't realize you've been blessed with until it's gone forever, when you need it the most.